It's a pleasure to be back in Iceland. I was here 50 years ago this coming summer as a college student seeking an inexpensive way to get to Europe. My visit to Iceland was simply a refueling stop at Reykjavík, but I'm delighted to be here for this conference. I bring you greetings from my colleague Lisa Murkowski. When I established my interest in Arctic issues, I stopped Senator Murkowski on the floor of the United States Senate and said, "Lisa, I would like to be the Arctic senator." And she said, "No, you can be the assistant Arctic senator." So I bring you greetings from Senator Murkowski of Alaska and also from President Obama. I was in touch with the White House yesterday morning because you know of his deep interest both in issues of the Arctic. He was in Alaska just this summer, and also in the subject of climate change. Why Maine? Well, we're the closest neighbor to Iceland, for one thing, and your intrepid explorers almost 1,000 years ago, it was actually more than 1,000 years ago, we think visited Maine. At the time it was called Vineland. And there are indications of the Nordic-based explorers exploring the coast of Maine. Also, Maine is the closest U.S. port to Asia when a ship takes the northern route. And as we see that opening opportunity for us, that is an important opportunity for our state. We are a coastal state, and our ports along the long shoreline of Maine, which, by the way, has the longest coastline of any state in the country, with the possible exception of Alaska, because it's so crooked. But our ports will be the first ports of call for ships coming from China and Asia to the United States. Climate change is perhaps the greatest challenge ever faced by our collective humanity. It is indeed a crisis. And I'm pleased to follow on the podium the Minister of China, because my understanding is that the Chinese word for crisis is made up of two words, two symbols. Those two are danger, not surprisingly, and opportunity, which is rather interesting. And a crisis, to me, is a time of danger, but also a time of great opportunity. The opportunities for scientific collaboration, for political collaboration, for the world finally realizing its potential to come together to meet a common challenge. Climate change can only be solved by international cooperation. As has already been mentioned, air, carbon does not respect boundaries. It must be through cooperation and dialogue that this problem is addressed. The Arctic, of course, is an issue that has emerged almost literally, in part because of the changes wrought by our climate. The Arctic opening up is the equivalent of the discovery of the Mediterranean Sea, which is an interesting way to think about it. And the question is whether we can deal with the issues emerging in the Arctic, issues of energy, of indigenous peoples, of security, of transit, all of those issues, can we deal with them in peaceful and non-confrontational ways? Throughout history, territory has been the source of conflict. Mark Twain, the famous American humorist, has many wonderful quotes, but my favorite is, "History doesn't always repeat itself, but it usually rhymes." I'd like to see us prove Twain wrong in terms of the Arctic. That we don't have to repeat history, and it doesn't even have to rhyme, that we can solve these issues, many of which are contentious, many of which involve questions of national sovereignty. But can we resolve these issues through cooperation, dialogue, international organizations, groups like the Arctic Circle and the Arctic Council? can we resolve these issues in ways that are peaceful and that are productive and that are beneficial to the citizens of the entire world. What we're talking about here this weekend is change. And change is hard. A friend of mine in Washington said, everyone's for progress, no one's for change. Change is difficult, and it always has been. And so we must rise to deal with this change. On December 2nd, 1862, I think one of the great leaders of the world, and certainly the greatest leader that our country has ever produced, Abraham Lincoln, went to address the United States Congress in the midst of our terribly destructive Civil War. And he was trying to impress upon the members of Congress the element of change and the challenge that that gave to our country. And in the process, he spoke what I think is the most eloquent and concise and best advice to any of us about how to deal with the issues of change. And I believe it's terribly apt today. Here's what Lincoln said. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty. Therefore, we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. That's what we all must do. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our planet. Thank you.